Hey guys, tonight we're brushing off the desert dust and diving into the sandy, surprisingly inventive world of ancient Egyptian dental care. Picture this. The sun is beating down on the limestone walls of Thebes. Your linen tunic is clinging with sweat, and somewhere between dodging temple taxes and praying, your cattle don't get swept away by the Nile. Your back molar starts throbbing with a vengeance. There's no dentist down the road, no peppermint rinse to swish. And spoiler alert, you're probably going to try brushing with something that used to be part of a goose. You probably won't survive this, at least not with a full set of teeth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle along a dusty alley of packed mud brick homes, each wall bleached pale by decades of sun and swirling sand. The air tastes dry, thick, with chalky grains that scratch the back of your throat. You're not thinking about your taxes or the fish market right now. No. Your thoughts are with that stubborn ache gnawing at your jaw, because in ancient Egypt, toothaches were as common as sand and nearly as unavoidable. Living in the desert had its perks: abundant sun, a constant supply of reed sandals, and some pretty sweet Nile festivals. But it also meant dust. And lots of it. Dust in your food, dust in your nose, and yes, dust between your teeth. Most Egyptians lived off a diet heavy in stone-ground grains. That's right, stone ground with actual stones. The result: every bite of bread came with a complimentary crunch of mineral grit. Think of it as the ancient version of eating toast with embedded sandpaper. Historians agree that this daily grainy grind contributed significantly to dental wear. Enamel wore down rapidly, and by middle age, many had flat, ground-down molars. Not ideal when your main dish was lentil stew or dried fish jerky. Archaeologists who've peeked inside mummies' mouths have found extensive tooth erosion abscesses and bone loss, all signs that mouths suffered silently. Still, despite their sandblasted teeth, ancient Egyptians weren't clueless about oral care. Far from it. They were in many ways some of the earliest known dental hygiene enthusiasts. Evidence of this is etched sometimes literally into the remains of tools, recipes, and papyri. Some Egyptologists even argue that their dental attempts were more advanced than those of later civilizations. Others say, well, it was still just a lot of crushed rocks and hope. But let's stay with you for a moment, walking through your daily routine. You've just woken up in your modest home near the Nile. Maybe you're a basket weaver or a worker helping construct a minor noble's tomb. You splash your face with water from a clay pot, then reach for your morning tooth cleaning kit. A pinch of pulverized ash, maybe some burnt limestone or natron mixed in, and a twig or small stick for application. Brushing isn't a luxury here. It's a desperate defense against the siege of grit in every meal. You squat outside your doorway, dabbing this sandy powder onto your teeth and scrubbing away with a little more determination than precision. The mix is harsh, astringent, and tastes faintly of old campfires. It does the job, though, sort of. You're not aiming for minty freshness. You're hoping to stop your gums from puffing up like baked figs. Scholars are still divided over just how routine this practice was. Some suggest only priests and higher-class Egyptians worried regularly about hygiene, while others believe even commoners had basic dental regimens. Either way, tooth cleaning wasn't exactly optional. If the dust didn't get you the sugar from fermented dates or honey-based offerings, surely would. And while your toothpaste might not be making headlines in modern dental journals, it's got one surprising advantage: abrasiveness. The burnt materials and crushed minerals helped remove plaque and food debris, though they also eroded enamel faster than a jackal at a picnic. You rinse your mouth with water, or maybe even a swish of natron solution, the same mineral mixture used in mummification. It's alkaline, weirdly salty, and not exactly refreshing, but it kills bacteria. Probably. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians knew this or just liked the way it stung. As you grab your tools for the day, you can't help but envy the priests with their jars of frankincense and resin for mouth freshening. You, on the other hand, get to chew on some herbs if you're lucky or hope no one gets too close. But hey, at least you're not one of the unlucky few who had to undergo temple-based tooth extraction rituals. That's coming later, unfortunately. The sun's higher now, baking the village rooftops and calling out the fishermen. And here you are, teeth slightly cleaner. Sand still lodged between a few of them, but ready to face another day in the ancient world, armed with burnt eggshell stubborn optimism, and a molar that's probably plotting revenge. You're crouched beneath the shade of a crumbling reed awning, sipping tepid water from a painted clay cup. A child darts past chasing a goat that clearly wants none of it, and somewhere nearby, someone is grinding flour with a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. That sound. It's the gentle hum of dental erosion in progress. Back in your home, or perhaps in the open courtyard where most of the day's living happens, you've got your dental mixture ready for round 2. And no, it's still not minty. But it is, believe it or not, a pretty sophisticated blend for the time. Enter Exhibit A grounded ox hoof, charred, powdered, and mixed with bits of burnt eggshell. This was the base for one of ancient Egypt's most common toothpastes. The hoofs were collected dried and burned into a gritty powder that smelled faintly of well-barn fire. Eggs were burnt too, not scrambled, not soft-boiled, but blackened until they crumbled like chalk. Together, these ingredients formed a paste so abrasive it could double as industrial cleaner. The ancient recipe found on one of the Eber's papyrus scrolls lists even more colorful additions: pumice, myrrh, and even ashes from burnt bread crusts. Myrrh offered antibacterial properties, while pumice was ground volcanic rock, excellent for scouring, slightly less ideal for long-term enamel preservation. The bread crusts may be just filler, or maybe the world's first toasted flavor. You dip your acacia twig, your version of a toothbrush, into this ashy concoction. The twig is soft at the end, frayed by your knife the night before. It's actually not bad at getting between your teeth, and you wonder vaguely why no one's marketed this to nobles yet. Then again, they probably use gold-plated twigs. Mainstream scholars agree that such dental routines, while brutal by modern standards, were early attempts at structured hygiene. Egyptians had the rare historical privilege of writing down their health rituals, often blending medicine with spiritual incantation. So yes, your burnt eggshell paste might come with a small chant to Horus for strong teeth and pleasant mouth. Whether that was for divine blessing or social reassurance is up for debate. And while we're here, let's talk texture. Your paste isn't creamy or smooth. It's more like gritty cake mix left out in the sun. But in a world where your meals double as geological experiments, it makes a strange kind of sense. Scrub enough and your teeth feel, well, not smooth exactly. More sandblasted. Your neighbor calls over the fence asking if you've got any leftover natron. Not for a toothache, she's mummifying a chicken for her daughter's birthday shrine. That's life here. One minute you're brushing with volcanic grit, the next you're embalming poultry. Versatility was a virtue. By the way, historians still argue whether everyone actually used burnt eggshells daily, or whether it was more of a priestly class practice. There's evidence in tomb writings and temple records that suggest widespread awareness, but usage may have depended on access to ingredients. After all, oxhoof and pumice weren't exactly growing on trees. Still, it's remarkable how persistent the formula was. Versions of it show up not only in Egypt, but later in Greek and Roman practices. Burnt bones, ashes, and eggshells have been found as base ingredients all the way into medieval apothecary texts. It's the toothpaste that wouldn't die. As you finish brushing, you spit discreetly into the sand, watching the black flecks disappear into the parched earth. There's something oddly satisfying about it. Primitive, yes, but effective in its own punishing way. Your breath still smells faintly of burnt breakfast, but your teeth feel a little less like they're turning into sandstone. You catch your reflection in a shallow bronze bowl. The edges of your teeth are duller than last year, worn from daily battle with bread and gravel. But there's no blood today and no abscess bulging under your cheek. That's a small victory, a quiet triumph in the relentless war between teeth and time. Later, as you lie on your mat beneath a canopy of mosquito netting, your mouth aches just a little. But it's a clean ache, a survivable one. You close your eyes, wondering what they'll use to brush teeth in 3,000 years. Probably something wild like peppermint foam or electric silver sticks. You snort at the thought, then yawn, stretch, and dream of smoother bread. The sun hasn't even peeked over the eastern ridge yet, but you're already up stretching your arms and yawning into the crisp pre-dawn air. Morning in the Nile Valley comes with a stillness interrupted only by the distant bray of donkeys and the soft slap of sandals on clay paths. It's another day of toil trade and, unfortunately, tooth scraping. Today, however, you've got a special ingredient to try in your daily dental routine, the elusive burnt eggshell. You heard about it from a scribe's assistant at the granary who swore it made his teeth shine like polished alabaster. Of course, the assistant also claims he once kissed a priestess from Memphis, so you take his stories with a generous pinch of natron. Still, curiosity wins. You poke at the blackened half-shell sitting on your reed tray. It's fragile and brittle, crackling under the pressure of your fingertip. You've roasted it yourself, gently placed in embers, until it turned an even charcoal gray. Now you grind it carefully with a small stone pestle. The powder is fine chalky and still smells faintly of burnt breakfast. You mix it with a dash of natron and a bit of water, stirring it into a thin, grainy paste. And this is your toothpaste. The Egyptians, especially during the later dynasties, believed in the purifying power of fire. Burning things didn't just make them safer, it transformed them. Burnt eggshell was thought to possess cleansing properties. A theory that makes surprising sense when you consider how calcium carbonate, one of its primary components, does in fact help scrub surfaces. Whether they understood the chemistry or just liked how it felt is unclear. But hey, it worked. Kind of. You apply the paste with your trusty frayed twig. The texture is gritty, but somehow more palatable than yesterday's hoof and pumice blend. You scrub working it into your molars, then pause when a chicken strolls lazily into your courtyard, looking deeply offended by your use of her genetic relatives. You offer her an apologetic nod and keep brushing. Burnt eggshells weren't the only experimental additive in the Egyptian dental arsenal. Some texts hint at the inclusion of crushed mint leaves, perhaps to add flavor or freshness, although others suggest these were used more in breath-freshening resins than in brushing mixtures. Still, imagine the optimism of the first person to combine eggshell salt and mint and call it a mouthwash. It's a recipe only desperation could perfect. One curious fact, eggshell wasn't reserved solely for dental use. In other cases, it was ground and used as a base for pigment in tomb paintings, or as an offering in rituals for rebirth and protection. There's something poetic about it. This humble shell, protecting life in one context, preserving cleanliness in another, and brightening up the walls of eternity in yet another. And yet, for all its utility, historians still debate whether burnt eggshell was used widely or mostly among the higher classes. Some mummified remains show signs of different cleaning techniques, abrasions consistent with other tools, not necessarily the eggshell paste. Others speculate that it was a trend among scribes or temple workers, passed quietly like a gossip-laden scroll through the halls of Ra. You spit again into the dirt. The paste has left your mouth feeling less gritty, which is saying something considering your breakfast will probably include more sand than you'd like. Still, there's a lingering feeling of cleanliness, or at least less filth. You smile. Sort of. And here's a twist. Modern researchers who've replicated ancient toothpaste recipes found that many, especially those using burnt shell or natron, are surprisingly effective at removing plaque. Of course, they also found that overuse would erode enamel and eventually make your teeth more vulnerable, but hey, perfection is a modern fantasy. You rinse with lukewarm water, then let the rest of the eggshell mixture dry in a small terracotta bowl. Later, it'll harden into a block you can chip at. The chicken, still judging, gives a disgruntled cluck and waddles away. You suspect she'll spread rumors about you to the rest of the coop. Wiping your mouth with the edge of your tunic, you head out for the day. You'll be pressing papyrus scrolls in the administration hall or weaving rope near the harbor, whatever puts barley on the table. But there's something quietly triumphant about walking into the world with a cleaner mouth than yesterday, even if your toothbrush was once an omelet. And as the sun crests the temple walls, painting the streets in soft gold, you wonder if the gods of Egypt, watching from their skyboats, are also brushing their divine teeth with celestial eggshells. Probably not. But it's a comforting thought. The sun hangs higher now, baking the sandstone streets, until they shimmer with mirage-like waves. You've been working all morning hauling baskets of flax, or scribing names onto papyrus, and your mouth feels dry enough to qualify as part of the surrounding desert. Time for a break, and wouldn't you know it, another chance to revisit your dental toolkit. Because in ancient Egypt, oral care wasn't a one-and-done affair. You swished, chewed, rubbed, and prayed more than once a day. You dip a small scoop into a nearby jar of cloudy liquid. This isn't water. It's natron dissolved in a bit of well water, forming one of the earliest mouthwash solutions in human history. Natron, for the uninitiated, is a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, essentially a salty, soapy mineral harvested from dried lake beds. The Egyptians used it for everything: mummification, laundry, even cleansing wounds. And here you are, swirling it casually in your mouth as if it's minty Listerine. It burns a little at first, not in a "my mouth is on fire" way, but more like licking a dusty rock dipped in ocean spray. But you push through, knowing it's likely killing whatever bacteria might be causing that slight gum inflammation you've been ignoring. The ancients believed natron purged impurities, both physical and spiritual. It cleansed your body, and if you were lucky, your soul. Now let's talk about the potential fish problem. Historians still argue whether early versions of this mouth rinse may have occasionally included hints of fish oil. Why? Well, some recipes, especially those linked with ritual purification, used oil as a carrier. And fish oil was abundant. If you're picturing what that might taste like, don't. Or at least don't if you want to keep relaxing. Suffice it to say that any blend of natron ash and fish extract probably made you rethink every unkind thing you ever said to your local priest. You spit delicately near a shrub and wipe your mouth. It feels paradoxically cleaner, sharper, like you've just gargled the essence of 1,000 desert sunrises. Still, it's not all chalk and brine. Some wealthier households experimented with their own twists on the mouthwash formula. There's a record scribbled faintly in the corner of a trade ledger suggesting resin from myrrh trees was added to enhance flavor and add antibacterial properties. This sounds lovely in theory, but knowing the Egyptians, it was probably mixed with something questionable. Goose fat, maybe. They loved goose fat. And if you were really fortunate, or if you worked near a temple, your rinse might include a few drops of aromatic wine. Yes, wine. Not to get tipsy, but as a mild antiseptic and breath freshener. You swirl that thought around in your mind longer than the natron. These practices weren't just for health, by the way. They were also for status. Having fresh breath, or at least less offensive breath, was a mark of dignity. Temple officials were expected to be pure in every sense, and that included how they smelled. Imagine standing before a statue of Osiris Breath, reeking of fermented fish. You'd probably get smited on the spot, or at least demoted to pyramid floor cleaner. But this natron business wasn't reserved for the elite. Pots of the stuff have been found in middle-class graves and rural homes. People across the Nile Valley had some access to it, especially if they lived near dried salt lakes like Wadi Naproom. It was cheap, versatile, and in many cases effective. You glance at the jar in your hand, watching the gritty sediment settle like silt in the Nile. You've just participated in a dental ritual older than most empires. A tradition passed from worker to priest, mother to daughter, chisel cutter to scribe, and all because someone thousands of years ago looked at a lake full of crusty white powder and thought, "I bet this would taste great in my mouth." As you prepare to get back to work, a breeze stirs the dust at your feet. You spot a neighbor rubbing his gums with a bit of willow bark, another folk remedy said to soothe inflammation. You nod in mutual recognition. Two tooth warriors in a desert full of plaque. And while no one's writing epic poems about your natron rinse, you know deep down that it's part of something bigger. A chain of habits, superstitions, and tiny victories that stretch back through centuries of sun-baked civilization. You, with your burnt eggshell and salty swish, are part of a legacy far too boring for school books, but oddly soothing in its own right. The day lumbers forward, and so do you, carrying rope, stone, or papyrus under one arm, depending on your station in life. You pass vendors shouting about figs and honey cakes, the scent of fish drying on wooden planks, and a man trying to sell a very dented-looking bronze mirror. Amid the chaos, your mind wanders to that stubborn bit of date still lodged in your back teeth. Time for a tool more ancient than the toothbrush, the chew stick. Before toothpaste tubes and battery-powered brushes, there was the acacia twig. You reach into your satchel and pull one out, its end already frayed from use. It's slightly yellowed and smells faintly of spice and sap. You press it between your molars and chew. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done, and you're not alone. In fact, most Egyptians preferred this simple, plant-based cleaning stick over more elaborate pastes, especially when they were on the go. Acacia twigs weren't chosen at random. The tree itself held religious significance, believed to have sprung from the tears of the goddess Isis. That gave the chew stick an added aura of holiness. Not to mention, it was antimicrobial fibrous and pleasantly bitter, which was a nice way of saying it didn't taste awful. Historians suspect these sticks doubled as breath fresheners, gum stimulators, and rudimentary floss, depending on how dexterous you were with your wrist. Some chew sticks were even carved with tiny notches, early attempts at customizing texture and grip. Others were simply snapped from the nearest branch, chewed until soft, then used to scrub every tooth in a circular motion. You go about your business, gnawing and brushing as you walk past a scribe grumbling about ink stains. No one bats an eye. Chew sticks are just part of life. But if you were really committed to the cause of oral hygiene, you might have carried another item tucked into your linen sash, the humble toothpick. Made from metal bone or wood, these pointed tools weren't just for picking, they were status symbols. Imagine standing at a banquet, casually flicking lentil skin from your bicuspid with a delicately carved ivory toothpick. Power move. Toothpicks were so common that some tombs included them among the buried items. Found next to combs, makeup pots, and kohl applicators, they suggest that grooming teeth included wasn't just practical. It was part of your identity, maybe even your afterlife wardrobe. Because apparently, Even in eternity, you didn't want spinach stuck in your smile. And yet not all scholars agree on how universal these tools were. While chew sticks seem to have been used by everyone from laborers to priests, toothpicks show up more often in elite tombs. There's an ongoing debate about whether commoners used reed's fronds or fingernails instead. But either way, the obsession with clean teeth appears fairly widespread. You pause under the shade of a sycamore, suck on your twig a bit longer, then use your thumbnail to dislodge a sesame seed with all the grace of a crocodile at afternoon tea. Not ideal, but it works. You rub your gums gently. There's a sore spot near one of your back teeth, but nothing alarming. Just another reminder that even ancient mouths needed constant upkeep. Nearby, a street vendor offers bundles of mint and parsley, two herbs sometimes chewed for freshening breath or calming the stomach. You trade a scrap of linen for a few leaves and chew thoughtfully, letting the bitter oils mix with the faint resin still lingering from your chew stick. It's not exactly spearmint gum, but it feels cool on your tongue. And so you go on scraping, chewing, picking, rinsing. You're part of a culture that, despite having no dental schools, no floss ads, and no TikTok tutorials, has figured out a surprisingly effective way to keep teeth intact in one of the most tooth-hostile environments imaginable. It's oddly comforting, this rhythm. You, your twig, and your slowly eroding enamel, all holding the line against the inevitable. You're not fighting for perfection, just preservation. And that in this sun-scorched, sand-sprinkled corner of the world is enough. You're back at home now, squatting beside a low clay hearth where dinner simmers in a battered copper pot. The scent of lentils, garlic, and faintly scorched onion fills the small room. Across from you, your cousin is laughing, mouth wide open, and you can't help but notice the rather impressive gap where his front tooth used to be. It's not an uncommon sight. In fact, in ancient Egypt, the question isn't whether you'll lose teeth. It's when. Bad breath, bleeding gums, and aching jaws were regular companions. But in elite households, there was an extra layer of pressure appearance. Having good breath and white teeth wasn't just practical. It was a matter of social grace, especially if you were one of the lucky few who worked in or around the palace, the temple, or the inner circles of high priests. You couldn't very well greet a dignitary while smelling like old fish and donkey sweat. So what did the upper class do about it? Resin, specifically frankincense, myrrh, and occasionally benzoin gum, all burned or chewed to freshen breath and signal affluence. You may not have access to the good stuff, but today, your aunt gifted you a tiny lump of something sticky, brown, and fragrant, probably myrrh, rolled in a bit of beeswax. You pop it into your mouth and chew carefully. It's bitter at first, but slowly sweetens, coating your tongue and masking the lingering tang of natron and goat cheese. Historians speculate these resins worked not just by overpowering smells, but by actually reducing the bacteria in the mouth. The antiseptic properties of frankincense are still noted today, though let's be honest, you're chewing it mostly to avoid public shaming. There's even evidence that breath-freshening resins were used ceremonially. Temple priests, before approaching the sacred idols, were required to cleanse their mouths, not just with natron, but with sweet-smelling gums and herbs. Some scholars argue this was as much spiritual as hygienic cleansing the mouth before speaking divine words. Others suggest it was simply the world's first don't talk to the gods with morning breath policy. But these tricks weren't just for the priesthood. Traders, scribes, even entertainers had their own breath routines. One popular method cloves imported at great expense. Chewing them released a spicy oil that numbed the tongue and masked even the most persistent aftertaste. Sadly, cloves were a luxury, and you're more likely to end up with a bit of crushed juniper berry or mint if you're lucky. As you chew thoughtfully, a neighbor passes by and raises an eyebrow. You give a polite smile, trying not to dislodge the pebble-sized chunk of resin tucked into your cheek. It's a strange experience somewhere between chewing gum and surviving a mild forest fire, but you feel oddly refreshed. Of course, not all of these remedies worked perfectly. Some caused more harm than good. Myrrh, while fragrant, could irritate already inflamed gums. And frankincense in large amounts might numb the tongue to the point where you accidentally bite it mid-sentence. But hey, that's the price of freshness. You reach for a bit of bread, dipping it into the stew. The crust crunches between your teeth with an all-too-familiar gravelly texture. Immediately, you regret not pre-chewing it with a stick first. You grab your chew stick again, worn at the tip, but still useful, and swipe at the leftovers wedged behind your molars. Dinner and dental care back to back. Some say ancient Egyptians rarely smiled with their teeth, not because they weren't happy, but because they knew the risks. Open your mouth too wide and someone might get a look at your dental battlefield. And while there's no direct evidence of breath shaming, one can imagine that a poorly scented mouth might draw whispers, especially at temple feasts or family rituals. So you finish your meal, rinse your mouth with the last sip of sour beer, and tuck your resin into a cloth pouch for tomorrow. Your gums sting slightly, but you know the sensation will fade. You feel for a fleeting moment a little cleaner, a little more in control. In a world where sand invades everything, and even your meals attack your enamel that counts for something. It's later now, and your cousin is complaining again, this time about a dull ache behind his back tooth. He's convinced it's the bread, or maybe the pomegranate seeds, or possibly divine punishment for stealing figs from the temple garden. You nod sympathetically, though you're secretly relieved it's not your own mouth pulsing in misery for once. Tooth pain in ancient Egypt was common. No surprise, really grit-filled food, no dental floss, and an absence of fluoride created the perfect storm. The remains of mummified Egyptians often show alarming levels of dental trauma. Deep cavities, cracked enamel-exposed roots and abscesses the size of scarab beetles. The worst part, there weren't any anesthetics, no clove oil drops, no Novocaine syringes. If something hurt in your mouth, it just kept hurting. That's not to say the Egyptians didn't try. Your cousin gestures toward the corner of the room, where a folded piece of papyrus is tucked beneath a clay amulet. He's been copying a tooth pain remedy from one of the temple scrolls. It includes ingredients like powdered goose fat, mashed beans, and beer foam, boiled into a paste and smeared on the aching tooth, while reciting a prayer to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of pain and plagues. You suppress a smile. It's ambitious. Scholars still debate whether these mixtures had any effect beyond placebo. The beer foam might have provided mild relief thanks to the alcohol content, and goose fat could create a temporary barrier between a tooth and the air. But most likely, it was the ritual, the act of doing something, that provided comfort. Hope, after all, can be more potent than herbs. There were also more aggressive options. If pain grew unbearable, you could visit the local healer often, a priest trained in medicinal arts. You'd lie on a mat in a temple courtyard while he examined your mouth with a hooked reed or bronze pick. If he deemed it necessary, he'd dig out the offending piece of tooth or lance the abscess. No numbing agents, no sterile gloves, just one man, a sharp stick and divine inspiration. You remember the tale of Aunt Merritt, who had a molar removed during a lunar festival. The priest told her to chew papyrus soaked in palm wine for strength. She passed out halfway through the process and woke up with a wad of linen in her cheek and half the village clapping. Good times. But not all treatments were that dramatic. For milder pain, many turned to compresses, warm cloths soaked in herbal infusions, and pressed to the jaw. Onion juice, henbane root, and powdered barley were among the popular ingredients. You decide to help your cousin prepare one, mashing garlic cloves with a stone and whispering a few choice words about his fig-stealing karma. The paste smells assertive. He winces as you apply it to the sore spot, then lies back, breathing through his nose and grumbling softly. There's a quiet peace in the moment despite the garlic fumes. A kind of ancient solidarity you endure. He endures. And so do the teeth mostly. Of course, the rich had other options. Some temples employed healers of the mouth, a role that modern scholars believe was a proto-dentist. These individuals specialized in oral rituals, treatments, and surgical interventions, if you could afford them. Papyrus scrolls from places like Deir el-Medina include instructions for treating swollen gums, loose teeth, and mouth ulcers. They don't always make sense, but they show genuine effort. A civilization trying to solve the riddle of dental disaster. One goose fat compress at a time. Back in your home, your cousin has dozed off the paste, drying into a flaky crust on his cheek. You leave him be. The night air drifts in through the open door, cool and dry. You take a sip of water, roll your jaw experimentally, and feel nothing but your usual slight twinge near the premolars. A victory. And as you curl up on your mat, the stars peeking through the slats in the roof, you can't help but think, despite all the pain, the scraping, the chewing, and the prayers, there's a strange beauty in the way your people treat something as mundane as a toothache. Not just as a problem, but as a connection to the gods, to nature, to each other. The morning air is unusually still. Even the birds seem to chirp in whispers as you rise and stretch, careful not to disturb your cousin, still snoozing on his mat with dried garlic crusted along his jawline. You step over him, and outside where the first light gilds the tops of palm trees and bathes the temple spires in pink gold. Today you have a task that takes you past the outer courtyard of the temple, and as luck would have it, that means you'll pass by the priest, who rumor has it knows how to remove a tooth with only a few whispered prayers and a bronze hook. Temple priests in ancient Egypt often doubled as healers. Their knowledge of the body came wrapped in religious ritual and spiritual symbolism. You didn't just see a dentist when your tooth ached. You sought out someone who was both spiritually pure and trained in the medicinal arts, which in practice meant a man in a white linen kilt holding a scroll in one hand and a suspiciously sharp reed in the other. You slow your pace as you pass the temple's open side gate. Inside, a young man is kneeling mouth open while the priest inspects his gums with the calm precision of someone used to squeamish clients. A second assistant stands nearby, holding a small ceramic dish filled with what looks like natron crushed herbs and possibly crocodile fat. The exact recipe changes with the day, but it always smells like something no modern pharmacy would approve. You linger, pretending to rearrange your satchel. The priest dabs the mixture onto a sore tooth, murmurs a hymn to Sekhmet, then presses gently with a reed tool. The patient flinches. There's a wet crack, not loud, just final. The man exhales, eyes wide. It's over. The priest wraps a strip of linen around the toothless gap and waves away the tiny crowd that has gathered. You keep walking, quickly. Back in your own neighborhood, the story spreads. Did you hear someone whispers? He used a fishbone last week. Said it was more precise. Someone else claims the priest pulled out a molar while the patient was meditating and he didn't feel a thing. Highly doubtful. But like most tales around temple healing, the truth and the miracle are often indistinguishable. Still, the core of the process remains surprisingly systematic. The ancient Egyptians knew that an infected tooth could lead to severe illness, even death. They saw dental disease not just as physical decay, but as spiritual imbalance. That's why many of their remedies included spells or symbolic gestures, because fixing a tooth meant realigning the soul. Some scholars believe the priests documented their most successful dental treatments on hidden papyri, stored away in temple libraries. Unfortunately, many of these documents have been lost or remain untranslated. One fragment, though, contains this delightful gem spit 3 times, mix natron with honey, and whisper the name of Ra backwards. It's not exactly FDA approved, but it paints a vivid picture of medical hopefulness. The truth is, Egyptian dentistry was a peculiar fusion of the mystical and the practical. You could have your abscess drained and your spirit purified in the same afternoon. You could chew bark for pain and chant for balance. And if you were lucky, it all worked. If not, well, let's just say statues never smiled with their teeth for a reason. As you return home, you find your cousin sitting up, poking cautiously at his face. Feels better, he mumbles. Still tastes like onion. He winces as he chews on a piece of dried fig. You pat his shoulder and hand him a chew stick. And as you settle onto your mat, the memory of the temple priest's calm expression sticks with you. The way he moved, the strange reverence of the moment, the mixture of pain and peace, it all adds another layer to your understanding of this ancient world. Here, even a toothache is sacred. By midday, the streets are bustling again. Donkeys laden with linen bolts, fishmongers yelling over each other, and temple musicians rehearsing for the next lunar festival with an enthusiasm that's entirely too loud for your slowly forming headache. You duck into the quieter edge of the necropolis, weaving past stacked tombs and sandy corridors, until you reach the tiny shrine where you've been assigned to deliver fresh offerings. It's hard to focus with the dry wind scraping against your skin, and worse, with the dull ache now blooming near your own upper molar. You clench your jaw, hoping it's just a random sting, but in the back of your mind, you know. It's the bread. Always the bread. Grinding grain in ancient Egypt wasn't like the soft whir of modern flour mills. It was done manually using grinding stones called querns. Flat, heavy slabs of stone that women and children would press against smaller stones over and over until the grain was reduced to something vaguely flour-like. Except it wasn't just flour. It was laced with minuscule shards of quartz and stone abrasive particles that snuck into every bite of bread and stealthily shaved away at people's teeth like desert erosion on temple pillars. You remember your mother kneeling over a grinding slab, her hands gray with flour dust, humming to herself while bits of grit bounced and danced with each motion. As a child, you thought the bread was supposed to crunch. Now you know better, it wasn't toasty crust. It was microscopic sabotage. Examinations of mummified remains consistently show that even the youngest adults had worn down molars flat like polished river stones. Some skulls reveal teeth with pulp cavities completely exposed, a result of years spent chewing on essentially edible sandpaper. No wonder there was a booming business in mouth salves and incantations. And you're feeling it now, right where yesterday's lentils lodged themselves. You press your tongue against the sore spot and wince. You think about those mummified mouths, their teeth frozen mid-grimace, locked forever in a silent protest against ancient baking techniques. Interestingly, bread was also offered to the gods and buried with the dead, often in elaborate loaves shaped like birds or lotus flowers. Some were real. Some were symbolic, made of mud or wood, so the dead wouldn't chip their ghost teeth in the afterlife. Archaeologists have even found tomb loaves with the embedded grit still intact. Historians love to analyze these samples, and while no one's exactly biting into them, the wear patterns on preserved teeth tell the whole story. You sit for a moment in the shadow of the tomb, the sandstone cool beneath your hands. You run your tongue along your back teeth, trying to guess how many more meals you've got left before one of them finally gives up. You take a tiny clay pot from your satchel and dab a bit of myrrh resin onto your fingertip. Pressing it gently into the sore spot, you breathe deeply through your nose. The ache doesn't vanish, but it dulls. A sleepy sort of numbness sets in. It's strange, isn't it? The way food, The very thing meant to sustain you can also be your undoing. You wonder how many others have crouched in this exact spot, jaws clenched against pain, dreaming of soft dates and river fish without bones. As you stand and dust off your tunic, you glance at a nearby tomb painting. It shows a banquet, loaves of bread, pitchers of beer, smiling guests. None of them are wincing. All of them seem perfectly content. You narrow your eyes. Liars, you mutter, and begin the walk home. And so you carry on, one tooth slightly looser than yesterday, one more gritty meal behind you. But still, walking, still smiling tightly, and still brushing with burnt eggshell like it's going to save you. Maybe it will. Or maybe you'll end up like the rest of them, immortal in name, and painfully remembered by the state of your dental remains. Back in your village, the air smells of baked mud and roasting lentils. Children run barefoot through courtyards, chasing each other with bits of palm bark, their laughter echoing off the walls. You walk slower now, favoring one side of your jaw as you chew thoughtfully on a sliver of dried fig. The sweetness helps mask the sting in your gums. You're not imagining it, this one tooth has officially turned against you. You greet an elder, sitting on a low stool beside a doorway. His smile is wide but mostly gum. He beckons you closer, and after a few pleasantries starts telling you a story you've heard before, about a time when bread wasn't as abrasive, when the Nile flooded more kindly, and when teeth stayed put until well into old age. You nod politely, but you both know the truth. Even mummies with the finest tombs and golden amulets have molars ground to nubs. You excuse yourself and step into the shade of your own home, where the mid-afternoon heat presses in like a thick curtain. On your reed mat sits a small pouch, a family heirloom of sorts. Inside are tools wrapped in worn linen, a bronze pick, a bone-handled scraper, and a carved toothpick shaped like a tiny ibis. They belong to your grandfather, a scribe known for his fastidious cleanliness. You run your finger along the ibis beak, remembering how he used to boast that he never lost a tooth until he was nearly 50. You've always suspected that was a lie. Still, these tools were precious. For scribes, priests, and anyone who worked close to the elite hygiene, wasn't just for comfort, it was for credibility. Imagine standing before a high official scroll in hand, breath smelling like fermented barley in last week's duck stew. You'd be dismissed before your ink dried. So tools like these weren't just functional. They were essential. Instruments of survival in both the physical and social sense. You select the bronze scraper and gently run it along the base of your aching molar. The sensation is familiar, not pleasant, but reassuring. It's sharp enough to dislodge food, dull enough not to draw blood. You rinse with a splash of natron water and lean back against the wall, exhaling through your nose. That dull throb hasn't gone away, but for now, it's manageable. Historians have discovered similar dental kits buried in tombs, often accompanied by mirrors, jars of salves, and even tweezers. The implication Egyptians treated their grooming tools with reverence. Some believe these kits were passed down generationally, just like yours, kept polished and sacred. Others argue they were for show trophies of status buried for the afterlife, rather than used in daily life. The truth is likely somewhere in between. You glance at your reflection in a bronze dish, your teeth worn though they are still hold their ground. You flash yourself a grin, then wince. A little too wide. That molar's going to need more than bronze if it doesn't settle soon. And then, you remember burial chambers, where tiny bundles of dental tools were found, nestled beside the bodies, as if the dead would continue to scrape and swish for eternity. It's almost poetic. No matter how high or low your station in life, your teeth kept you humble. Even the most powerful pharaoh, wrapped in gold and incantations, likely carried tooth pain into the afterlife. and so, apparently, must you. You repack the tools with care, folding the linen and tucking the pouch back into its spot under your mat. The pain has subsided just enough for you to move freely again. Dinner's not far off. Probably another round of lentils and grit, but you'll be ready this time. And as you sit quietly watching dust float in the shaft of light filtering through your doorway, you marvel at the ingenuity of it all. The scraping, the swishing, the desperate measures passed down from generation to generation. Not glamorous, not painless, but profoundly human. The evening sun paints the walls in warm amber as shadows stretch across the village, softening the rough edges of stone, straw, and skin. It's the hour when dinner scents mingle with incense smoke, and distant flutes echo over the rooftops. You're helping prepare offerings for tomorrow's small tomb ceremony, sorting a mix of lentil cakes, dates, and of all things, tiny polished toothpicks made from palm spine. You smile at the irony. Even in death, clean teeth apparently mattered. You pause to inspect one of the offerings, a fine wooden box, carved with lotus blossoms and tucked inside a delicate bundle of grooming tools, including a bone pick, a chewed stick, and a linen pouch dusted with natron. It's all going to be buried with the deceased, a local weaver who died at 45 with most of his teeth miraculously still intact. That alone has become the talk of the village. The presence of dental tools in tombs is not unusual. Archaeologists have found them in both elite and modest graves, sometimes arranged with reverence, sometimes shoved in among the offerings like afterthoughts. But their inclusion speaks volumes. These weren't casual objects. They were part of your daily ritual, your identity, even your legacy. To be buried without them would be like being buried without your name. You gently place the box beside a clay pot of barley beer. Tomorrow it'll be lowered into the earth, sealed in silence, and offered to the gods along with prayers for safe passage. But tonight it sits on your lap like a story waiting to be told. You recall tales of craftsmen who fashioned toothpicks from ivory, sometimes even gilding them. Such extravagance was usually reserved for priests or court officials. But even among everyday people, care was taken to preserve the tools that preserved the mouth. It's humbling, really, to think that someone once whittled a twig into a point and decided that death wouldn't stop their dental routine. And these picks weren't just functional. They were status symbols. A well-made pick could be tucked into a sash or displayed on a string of amulets. One particularly elaborate example found in a noblewoman's tomb was engraved with protective hieroglyphs and wrapped in gold leaf. Clearly, even the afterlife had standards. You lift one of the picks from the bundle and test its point. It's fine and sharp, clearly made with care. Probably by someone who understood that between grains, seeds, and the occasional dried fish scale, a reliable toothpick could be the difference between comfort and agony. You think about the people who carved these tools by hand, using little more than flint knives and patience. Artists of oral survival, historians still argue over whether these were primarily for burial display or everyday use. Some insist the pristine condition of many picks suggests ceremonial placement. Others believe they were just well cared for, oiled and polished between meals like sacred relics. After all, when you don't have 10 different brushes and floss kits, one tool must do it all and last. You hand the bundle to the priest's assistant, who bows in thanks and disappears into the gathering dusk. Tomorrow, the weaver's body will be wrapped in linen adorned with charms and lowered into the sands beside hundreds who came before him, each carrying their beliefs, their fears, and perhaps a little stick of wood carved with love. Back at home, you pull out your own toothpick and run it gently between two worn molars. It catches a grain. Success. You lean back against the wall, the pick still in hand, and feel oddly reassured. In a world where pyramids crumble and rivers shift their course, Something as small as a toothpick endures. Quiet, humble, and necessary. The stars are out now, blinking softly above the flat rooftops as you recline beneath a sky so clear it feels like a painted ceiling in one of the nobles' tombs. Somewhere a dog barks once and falls quiet again. You're fiddling with an old story told in whispers, the tale of a woman who had her broken tooth replaced with gold wire and a bit of ivory. Real. Maybe. But here in Egypt, stranger things have happened. You've heard the tale passed down in at least 3 different ways. In one version, she was a wealthy merchant's wife who chipped a front tooth on a date stone and had it bound in place with a thread of gold. In another, she was a singer for the Temple of Hathor, and the replacement was made from polished cow bone shaped and inserted by a priest who specialized in, shall we say, smile miracles. Whether these stories are pure invention or rooted in some sliver of truth, one thing is clear. Cosmetic dental fixes were not beyond the realm of ancient possibility. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of early dental prosthetics, gold wires twisted around loose teeth, sometimes anchoring them back into the gum or holding them beside stronger neighbors. One skull belonging to a middle-aged man buried in Thebes revealed a crude but clever dental bridge using gold to tether a dislodged tooth in place. Not a perfect fix, but in a society without modern adhesives, it's downright ingenious. Of course, this kind of treatment wasn't available to just anyone. Gold was sacred, associated with the sun, god Ra, and believed to be incorruptible, both physically and spiritually. So if you had gold in your mouth, it wasn't just a dental fix. It was a declaration. You were someone worth preserving. Someone who refused to meet the afterlife with a crooked grin. You trace your own teeth with your tongue, imagining what it might feel like to have a gold thread running along your gums. Heavy. Probably. Uncomfortable. Definitely. But also maybe just a little dazzling. Imagine showing up at a banquet with your teeth glinting in the firelight. That's not just hygiene that's pageantry. There are also whispered accounts of false teeth carved from ivory or wood. These, if real, were likely decorative rather than functional. After all, chewing with a wooden incisor sounds like a recipe for splinters and regret. Still, if you were going to be embalmed and buried among the elite, it made sense to leave the world with a full set, even if some were borrowed. Historians debate the accuracy of these stories. Some argue that what looks like a dental prosthetic may simply be accidental bone shifts during mummification. Others point to meticulous tomb art, showing people with even glowing teeth, and ask why the obsession, unless it mattered. And it did matter. Egyptians associated the mouth with power. Speaking names was magic. Singing hymns pleased the gods. To lose your teeth wasn't just physical, it chipped away at your dignity, your ritual purity, your connection to the divine. So whether through natural remedies, daily scraping, or the occasional bit of gold thread ingenuity, ancient Egyptians fought to preserve their smiles. Not for vanity alone, but for the afterlife. Because who wants to greet Osiris with a half-toothless smirk? You reach into your pouch and pull out your old pick, running it along the front of your teeth, as if polishing for an invisible audience. The stars glimmer above, and for a moment you imagine them as the eyes of gods watching your evening routine with mild approval. Not bad, you think. Not perfect, but not bad. You wake before sunrise, the village still cloaked in bluish shadows, and the air oddly cool against your skin. Your jaw feels tender, but it's not the sharp throb of infection, more like the aftermath of too much chewing and too little luck. You sit up, reaching instinctively for your dental pouch and then pausing. Today's not for scraping or rinsing. Today, you're trying something older. Something stranger. Tucked beneath your sleeping mat is a folded piece of papyrus, yellowed and brittle, its ink faded but still legible if you squint. It's a remedy passed down from your grandmother, who swore it once saved her from losing half her teeth during a particularly bad season of millet and regret. The mixture: a dab of goose fat, a crushed mint leaf, and the whispered name of Thoth under your breath. You grimace as you prepare the paste. The goose fat has a sour tang and sticks to everything: your fingers, the bowl, your sense of dignity. Still, you mash the mint folded into the fat and then murmur Thoth's name 3 times while facing east. It feels a little ridiculous, but the ache in your gums reminds you that desperation rarely looks dignified. This blend, strange as it seems, appears in several ancient medical texts. The Ebers Papyrus lists a number of toothache remedies that include everything from juniper berries and crushed barley to dried mouse tails and crocodile dung. Yes, really. You count yourself lucky today's recipe is merely unappetizing, not outright horrific. You smear the concoction along your sore gum. It's greasy, oddly warm, and doesn't smell as awful as expected. Maybe there's something to it. After all, Egyptians viewed the mouth as a portal, sacred, dangerous, powerful. Treating it wasn't just medicinal. It was mystical. Some scholars believe these healing mixtures worked as much through psychological comfort as chemistry. When pain met ritual, belief kicked in. And when belief was strong enough, it often brought real relief. Others suggest that many recipes were based on observational wisdom. Goose fat created a seal. Mint cooled inflammation. Coincidence? Maybe. But sometimes ancient logic doesn't require modern validation. You sit quietly, letting the mixture settle. The mint soothes a little. The fat coats the inside of your cheek with a faint, oily warmth. You close your eyes and try not to think about how close you came yesterday to asking the temple priest for the bronze hook. Later that morning, you overhear a conversation in the market. A woman swears her neighbor cured a mouth abscess by burying a linen strip soaked in natron beneath a sycamore tree during a new moon. Another insists chewing on pomegranate bark while reciting a prayer to Bastet works wonders. You chuckle to yourself. You're not alone in your search for healing. Just one more desperate soul in a very long, very creative line. At home, your cousin, his garlic episode now mostly forgotten, leans in with wide eyes and asks if the goose fat worked. You shrug. Better than dung, you say, and he nods solemnly. You glance once more at the folded papyrus. The ink is smudged near the bottom, where years of use have worn away part of the final instruction. You imagine what might have been there. Repeat as needed, or maybe avoid chewing rocks. You'll never know. But for now, the pain is manageable. And that's enough. The afternoon sun creeps across the stone threshold like a lazy cat stretching its golden limbs into every corner of your small home. You're resting your jaw after this morning's goose fat adventure, head tilted back against the wall. Eyes half closed when a familiar voice floats in from the street. It's your uncle, the one who claims he once dined with a Greek trader from across the sea. He never quite proves it, but his stories are always entertaining, and today's is no exception. You know what the Greeks said about us? He begins grinning as he settles beside you. They were obsessed with our teeth. You raise an eyebrow. They wrote about it. Claimed we brushed more often than we prayed. That we cleaned our mouths with stones and sticks and made it look like magic. He's not wrong. Ancient Greek accounts describe Egyptian cleanliness with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Herodotus, that famously nosy traveler, noted the Egyptians' peculiar hygiene habits, including their regular washing, shaving of the body, and yes, even their dental care. To the Greeks, who sometimes bathed once a week and considered body odor a sign of masculinity, the Egyptian obsession with cleanliness must have seemed borderline fanatical. Some Greek texts mention Egyptians using powdered pumice and crushed herbs to polish their teeth. One even hints at burnt shell and ash rubbed with fragrant wood, which, if that isn't burnt eggshell and acacia sticks, you don't know what is. Whether the Greeks exaggerated is up for debate, but the core observation holds Egyptians treated the body, especially the mouth, with reverence. It's funny to think about now, lying here with goose fat still coating your gum. Somewhere across the Mediterranean, a philosopher may have once chuckled over the idea of someone praying while brushing. But then again, they weren't eating your bread, were they? Your uncle leans closer, lowering his voice like he's revealing state secrets. One Greek even wrote that Egyptian priests wouldn't speak the name of the gods without cleaning their mouths first. Can you imagine a brush, a rinse, and then divine conversation? He chuckles, revealing a mouth where more teeth are missing than present. You can imagine it, actually. The priests of Egypt followed strict purification rituals before every sacred act, bathing, shaving, even avoiding certain foods. Cleaning the mouth was not vanity. It was preparation for power. If the gods were listening, you'd better not reek of onions and leftover fish. There are frescoes showing priests holding cloths to their mouths, not to stifle coughs, but to preserve sanctity. Some scholars believe this was symbolic, a way to ensure that no unclean breath defiled the temple air. Others suggest it was more practical. No one wanted a divine curse because someone forgot to rinse. You stand and stretch, inspired by your uncle's storytelling. Maybe you'll scrub your teeth with a bit of that dried mint hanging from the rafters, just in case a god swings by unexpectedly. You pull down a few leaves, crush them between your fingers, and press the pulp against your back teeth. It's harsh and earthy, but it wakes your mouth up in a good way. As your uncle continues spinning tales of Greek envy and Egyptian smugness, you find yourself appreciating the strange legacy of your ancestors. Not just the pyramids and the painted tombs, but the daily rituals, the little tools, the stubborn fight to stay clean in a dusty world. And while you can't be sure how accurate those Greek accounts were, you like the idea that even back then, Egypt had a reputation for being the land of the well-scrubbed smile. A place where you could chew twigs, burn eggshells, and emerge from it all just a little bit cleaner than when you began. You're sweeping out the corner of the home, lazily pushing dust and date pits into a pile, when your cousin pokes his head through the doorway. "Hey," he says, grinning. "Have you ever wondered why no one smiles in the statues?" You lean on the broom and squint, because they knew bread would betray them. He laughs, but it's a fair question. The statues, the proud kings, the divine queens, the scribes frozen. Mid-scroll, all stare solemnly into the beyond lips, pressed tight chins high. Regal, yes, but not exactly cheerful. There's an ongoing theory about that whispered among temple workers and tomb painters. Some say it's a style choice, that the serene, closed-mouth expressions were meant to convey divine calm and eternal wisdom. Others more practically suggest it had something to do with the very real and very public state of ancient Egyptian teeth. You've seen the remains skulls in shrines, jaws, and museum drawings. The wear on those teeth is brutal. Enamel-stripped flat roots expose decay, tucked deep in the molars like hidden curses. If you were a sculptor, hired to immortalize a priest or noble, you probably wouldn't want to carve a smile that revealed a mouthful of cracked and cratered ivory. And maybe the people themselves understood this. Maybe they didn't smile for portraits the way we do today. Maybe they didn't need to. In a culture that prized composure and symmetry, a solemn mouth was a sign of control. You weren't grinning for attention, you were channeling the divine order of Ma'at. Calm, balanced, intact. Still, that doesn't stop you from imagining what a smiling pharaoh would look like. Crooked, maybe. Confident. A little crumb stuck on his lower lip from breakfast. Human. You pull a chipped clay mirror from the wall and look at yourself. You try the expression, Tight-lipped, serene, statue-like. Not bad. You look wise. You also look like you might be quietly judging someone's decision to floss with date stems. A breeze stirs through the open window, rattling the strings of beads that hang in place of a door. You think about the choices artists made, how even the smallest curl of a lip could be avoided, all in service of timelessness. You wonder if the sculptors ever chuckled to themselves as they carved, thinking, if only they saw what we really look like when chewing through this sand bread. Historians continue to debate this one. Was the lack of smiling simply a stylistic norm, tied to religious and social expectations? Or did it reflect a discomfort with revealing less than perfect teeth in a society where the mouth held spiritual power? You're leaning toward both. After all, your mouth today is a battleground between mint leaves, groundstone, and last week's fish bones. You wouldn't flash that to posterity either. There's something reassuring in knowing the ancient world had its insecurities too. Even kings with all their gold and gods might have kept their smiles to themselves. You go back to sweeping, pausing now and then, to flex your jaw and test the healing side of your mouth. The ache is less today. The mint helped. The goose fat probably didn't. But that's okay. Outside, children play near the canal, shouting and laughing with toothy, gap-filled grins. None of them are worried about statues or solemnity. Not yet. But one day, they'll learn. The smile fades. The mouth closes. And the world somehow keeps turning. By the time the temple bells toll for evening offerings, you're perched on a ledge near the riverbank, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of reed while your sandals dangle just above the Nile's slow current. It's the kind of moment that makes you feel briefly like the protagonist of your own myth, just without the chariot, the gold jewelry, or the jawline unmarred by persistent molar pain. You're thinking about something you heard from an old scroll keeper, a story about Ra, the sun god himself, suffering from a divine toothache. It was told half-jokingly, as though even celestial beings weren't immune to the gritty diet of mortals. According to the tale, Ra grew irritable as he aged, not because of rebellious humans or cosmic duties, but because he couldn't chew lotus roots anymore without flinching. The legend goes that Thoth, god of wisdom, fashioned a poultice made from papyrus ash, crushed peridot, and morning dew to soothe him. And afterward, Ra was so pleased, he granted Thoth the right to govern scribes and healers. Now, whether this is literal, metaphorical, or just a priest's creative excuse for why his mouth smelled like wet scrolls, no one knows. But it certainly gave dental rituals a kind of divine endorsement. The mouth wasn't just a body part in ancient Egyptian belief. It was the gate of speech, incantation, and power. Priests even performed the opening of the mouth ceremony on statues and mummies, using tools shaped like fishhooks or adzes to symbolically give the dead the power to speak and eat in the afterlife. Imagine that your eternal happiness depends not just on your deeds, but on whether a ceremonial dentist remembered to poke your face with the sacred spoon. You find that oddly comforting. In a world so concerned with eternity, the act of speaking, of chewing, of tasting was a kind of blessing. Toothaches weren't just annoying. They were obstacles to sacred function. You sitting here on this bank with your twig and your ache are participating in a millennia-old struggle to keep the most important doorway in your body open and functional. There's a breeze off the water now, bringing with it the smell of papyrus mud and distant myrrh smoke. You let it wash over you and close your eyes. Somewhere behind your eyelids, you imagine Ra rubbing his cheek with celestial frustration, while Thoth rolls his eyes and mutters about proper brushing technique. And yet the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. The gods in their all-knowing divinity would understand tooth pain. How could they not? If they watched over harvests, floods, childbirth, and war, surely they also saw the daily struggle of people hunched over bread, too rough for mortal molars. Some scholars scoff at the idea of gods with human ailments. Others lean in and say, why not? The Egyptians didn't separate the divine from the physical. Everything from the wind in your lungs to the ache in your gums was touched by spirit. The gods had ears, eyes, mouths, and sometimes just maybe dental drama. You smile gingerly and toss the reed into the river, watching it swirl away like an offering. Then you stand and stretch, brushing sand from your robe and feeling, despite the lingering ache, a little bit lighter. Not because the pain is gone, but because the story makes it make sense. You're not suffering alone. You're part of a lineage, sacred, strange, and full of herbal poultices and whispered prayers to fix things that modern medicine would just call a cavity. But in this world, that cavity is a portal. And tonight, you vow to keep it clean, sacred, and hopefully free of divine-level discomfort. The wind picks up after sundown, carrying with it the scent of roasted barley, distant incense, and damp reeds from the canal. You're walking back through the dim corridors of the workers' village when a glint of white near a vendor's stall catches your eye. Not jewelry, not pottery, but something much more practical. A bundle of imported ivory tooth tools, delicately carved and bound in a reed cord. You pause, gaze, lingering. These aren't local. Imported from the south, maybe Nubia, or farther still. Perhaps from across desert routes that trace the edges of kingdoms, with names sung only in merchant songs. The stall owner sees you looking and nods, lifting the bundle for closer inspection. For priests, he says, or scribes who want to look like priests. He winks. You take one of the tools, running your fingers over the smooth, creamy finish. The tip is carved to a delicate point clearly meant for precise cleaning, not brute scraping. This isn't your everyday acacia twig. This is prestige imported refinement, and the faint aroma of sandalwood oil confirms it was stored carefully. Luxury embedded in the most intimate routines. The ancient Egyptians were no strangers to long-distance trade. From incense-bearing caravans to lapis lazuli, from the east items traveled far to reach the Nile. And oral hygiene, surprisingly, was part of that exchange. Ivory, particularly elephant tusk, was rare and expensive, used in combs, amulets, and yes, the occasional high-status toothpick. What makes these tools special isn't just the material, it's the implication. Someone cared enough about their mouth, their smile, their breath, to import tools from faraway lands. Not just for functionality, but to show that they belong to a certain class, a certain circle. Imagine the quiet flex of drawing an ivory scraper from your sash during a banquet. You're not just cleaning your teeth. You're reminding everyone that you can. You hesitate. The price is steep, more barley than you've stored for winter. But the seller leans in conspiratorially. Try it, he says. First pass is free. You oblige. The tip slides between your back teeth like it was made just for you. Smooth, cool, precise. You almost don't want to hand it back. It's a taste of elegance, of temple privilege, of the kind of grooming that pharaohs themselves would approve. Historians often argue about the accessibility of such imports. Were they truly used for hygiene or just decorative? Some claim they were more symbolic tokens of diplomacy or status markers, never meant to touch a molar. Others point to worn tips and mineral traces in the grooves as proof they were used and used often. You choose to believe the latter. After all, if you had something this beautiful and useful, wouldn't you use it too? Back at home, you stare at your acacia stick with something approaching mild betrayal. It's reliable, yes, but now it feels rustic. You sigh and wrap your old twig anyway. The ivory tool isn't yours, at least not tonight. Still, the experience stays with you. As you chew a mint leaf and scrub with your modest twig, you picture yourself instead with the ivory handle in hand. A noble satchel slung across your shoulder. A golden charm dangling above your brow. All because of a toothpick. The dreams of empires, it turns out, often begin in the quiet spaces between your teeth. You're grinding herbs on a flat stone the next morning, working lazily, still half dreaming about the ivory toothpick you didn't buy. The smell of mint and dried juniper clings to your fingertips, but your mind is elsewhere on a story your neighbor told last night as you both watched fireflies flit between oil lamps. A tale about a young scribe who cured his toothache by smearing his gums with myrrh soaked in honey, then singing hymns to Bastet until he fell asleep. You laughed then, but now, with a twinge creeping through your molars again, you're willing to consider the idea. So you start mixing a pinch of powdered myrrh, sticky and fragrant, a spoonful of fermented honey from the temple storehouse, a little oil to make it smooth. You roll it between your fingers until it forms a thick, amber-colored balm, warm to the touch. The Egyptians prized myrrh above nearly all other resins. It was sacred, medicinal, and beautifully fragrant, used in embalming religious offerings, and yes, even dental salves. You apply the mixture carefully to your gums, massaging it in with a clean reed. The taste is sweet at first, then bitter, earthy, ancient. You sit back, letting the balm melt into the ache and hum softly. Not to Bastet necessarily, but to the rhythm of your own comfort. This wasn't uncommon. In fact, several papyri contain instructions for similar treatments. One prescribes myrrh and honey ground with goose feather quills to be applied 3 times daily while facing the moon. Whether that was science or superstition, no one can say. But modern researchers have noted the antimicrobial properties of both ingredients. Myrrh fights bacteria. Honey soothes inflammation. Your ancestors may not have had microscopes, but they had eyes, patience, and pain. They learned what worked. You stretch out on your mat, letting the mixture do its quiet work. The air smells like desert herbs and old parchment. You imagine being a scribe in a candlelit temple, surrounded by scrolls and resin-scented ink, writing down a tooth remedy for future generations. Something as simple as, when pain strikes, try sweetness and bitterness together, and rest. And then there's the sweeter irony. The same myrrh you're using to heal was once packed into the mouths of the dead, but to prepare them for eternity. A way to stop decay. A gift to the gods. Now it coats your aching gum like a gentle shield. You smile faintly, lips closed. Outside, a boy runs past carrying a sack of onions, and you can hear a vendor calling out prices for barley and dates. But in here, the world is quiet, slow, sacred. There's still debate among scholars over how widely these resins were used for dental purposes. Some argue that myrrh was too valuable for daily application. Others point to large temple stores and medical scrolls that list it liberally, suggesting that for those with access, it was a daily staple, perhaps even a mark of refinement. You like that idea. That even the smallest ritual, a dab of resin, a whispered hymn, could signal status and serenity. You rub your jaw, now tingling slightly. The pain is still there, but it's muted, distant, like a voice through heavy linen. You might not be a priest or a noble, but in this moment, with your balm and your breath and your dignity intact, you feel just a little closer to comfort. And you think maybe that's all ancient medicine ever promised. Not perfection, not a cure, just the next step toward feeling human again. The sun is high again, beating down like a divine spotlight as you make your way past a row of courtyard homes. The scent of drying fish and crushed herbs fills the air. You're heading to visit an old woman known in the village for her knowledge of forgotten cures, remedies, so old that even temple scrolls barely mention them. She greets you from the shade of her doorway with a knowing smile and a crooked finger that beckons you inside. You sit cross-legged on a reed mat as she busies herself near a low shelf, rummaging through jars filled with powders and roots. "You've tried goose fat," she mutters. and honey. You've chewed mint until your breath smells like a pharaoh's banquet. She cackles softly. But have you tried crocodile dung? You freeze. She holds up a small pot, the contents dark, dry, and uncomfortably earthy. Used for many things, she says, not just toothaches. Fertility charms, skin treatments, even spiritual purification. But yes, some say it dulls pain when applied to the gums. Just a pinch. Now there's no easy way to prepare your modern mind for this. But crocodile dung was indeed one of the more peculiar ingredients in ancient Egyptian medicine. The Ebers papyrus includes it in various recipes, not just for oral care, but for contraception healing rituals and warding off spirits. Historians still argue whether it had any real effect or was just part of the larger belief in the power of dangerous animals. You hesitate, but the dull throb in your jaw is persuasive. The old woman dips her finger into the powder and dabs a pinch along your gum line. The taste is awful. Earthy, bitter, and slightly reptilian. You try not to gag as she hands you a cup of date juice to chase it down. She watches you with amusement, then begins telling you the story of a temple priest who once swore by the stuff. According to legend, he carried a satchel filled with dried crocodile dung and natron, using it to treat everything from bad breath to tooth abscesses. He lived to be 80, supposedly, with most of his teeth. Of course, others claimed he simply had an unusually small mouth and didn't eat much bread. You sit quietly, letting the concoction soak in. The sensation is oddly numbing, or perhaps your body has simply decided it can't process any more bizarre stimuli for one day. The old woman hums to herself, grinding more herbs while you reflect on your choices. Archaeologists have found traces of crocodile dung in medical kits uncovered from ancient homes near temple complexes. Some samples were carefully sealed in jars and labeled with symbols for health and fertility. Whether they were used regularly or simply kept as spiritual tokens, no one knows. But their presence is undeniable. Scholars debate their efficacy, of course. Some suggest that dried dung might contain trace compounds that reduce inflammation. Others, more skeptical, argue that it was the psychological ritual that mattered. You were applying something fierce, something sacred, and that alone might convince the mind to ease the body. You rinse your mouth again, this time more thoroughly. The bitterness fades, leaving behind only a faint numbness and the growing suspicion that you may never kiss anyone again. Still, there's a strange sense of accomplishment, You've tried something that connects you, not just to the past, but to a lineage of survival people who made do with what they had believed in the healing power of the land and endured with whatever was within reach, even if that meant scooping up after a crocodile. The old woman pats your hand. Come back tomorrow, she says, if it helps. If not, we'll try something worse. You nod, half laughing, and step back into the sunlight. The warmth hits your face. The Nile glimmers in the distance, and somewhere deep in your jaw, the pain has dulled to a whisper. You walk slower this time, a little wearier, a little wiser, and definitely more selective about what you let into your mouth. The next morning, you rise with a sore jaw and a more cautious outlook on herbal experimentation. The memory of crocodile dung still haunts your taste buds. You make a silent vow to avoid anything described as earthy from now on, but your curiosity hasn't dimmed. It's just shifted direction. Today, you're heading to the outer fields to visit your uncle's friend, a herder known for his strange yet oddly effective ideas about oral care, especially those involving camel milk. You arrive as the sun crests the eastern hills, casting long shadows across rows of tethered animals. The herder, a leathery man with a beard like woven flax, is already awake and pouring fresh milk into a wide bowl. "You've come about your teeth," he says without looking up. "Good. I've got something. Camel milk," he tells you, "isn't just for drinking. In some circles, especially further south and out near desert trade routes, It's used for everything from treating skin ailments to soothing sore gums. It's gentle, he says, handing you a small cup, and it cools the fire in your mouth. You sip. It's warm, slightly salty, and faintly sweet. Not unpleasant. He dips a strip of linen into the bowl, then folds it and instructs you to press it along your gum line. You obey, feeling the cloth soften against your teeth like a cool balm. It's not a miracle cure, but it's comforting, and in a life ruled by discomfort that counts. Historians have long overlooked these rural hygiene practices, focusing instead on temple-based scrolls and elite burial goods. But oral traditions like this one tell another story. Among herders and laborers, camel milk was prized for its antibacterial properties. Modern science confirms this to a degree. Camel milk contains enzymes and proteins that reduce inflammation and fight bacteria. Did ancient Egyptians know this? Maybe not consciously, but they observed, and they remembered what worked. You sit under a tree as the herder explains how he learned the method from his grandmother, who learned it from a Nubian trader who once journeyed with a caravan all the way to the Red Sea. He insists camel milk helped her keep her teeth until the day she died while still chewing dried meat tougher than temple leather. You listen half amused, half impressed. It's clear this isn't just about milk. It's about connection to the land, to animals, to elders, who understood health as something you cultivated slowly through attention and patience. Not just salves and chants, but habits, routines, and yes, a little milk every morning. As you prepare to leave, the herder hands you a small flask. Swish with it tonight, he says. No dung, no fire. Just this. You nod gratefully and walk back along the dusty road, feeling a little more cared for than before. You think about how many small, quiet remedies have been forgotten. Not because they didn't work, but because no one wrote them down in gold leaf scrolls. There's something sacred about that too. The way knowledge lives in practice, not parchment. Later that evening, you rinse with the milk. It's soothing, clean. There's no sting, no bitterness, just a calm coolness that settles into your sore spots and reminds you gently that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just lingers. It's midday again, and the sun has turned the walls into glowing slabs of light. You sit on your mat, your back to the cool stone, and press your fingers gently along your jaw. There's still some swelling, but the ache has faded into something dull and manageable. The camel milk has helped. Or maybe it's the quiet belief behind it, the comfort that someone once thought of this passed it down, and now it's working its way through you like an old story, spoken in soft whispers. You reach for a small leather satchel tucked under your sleeping mat. Inside is a bundle wrapped in worn linen, the toolkit of a scribe long passed down in your family. You unfold it slowly, reverently. A bronze scraper, a chipped ivory pick, and your favorite, a delicate two-pronged reed with polished ends for working between the teeth. It's not temple issued, but it's yours. You wonder what the ancient scribes did when their mouths betrayed them mid-scroll. What did a man do when he was halfway through copying a tax edict and suddenly felt a shock shoot through his jaw? Did he pause and press his fingers against the pain? Did he swish water and grit his teeth until the ink dried? In some scribal quarters, especially in the city of Memphis, there are records of small relief kits. Not official temple medicine, but personal bundles carried by scribes, resins, twigs, powders, and sometimes even pain relief charms scrawled on fragments of papyrus. One reads, "To speak clearly without pain, chew the root of the bitter reed and call upon Thoth with steady hand." You imagine that scribe muttering the words while chewing furiously, trying to finish a decree before the pain became louder than the ink. You decide to try the same. You pick up a slender reed, bitter dry, slightly peppery, and begin chewing slowly. It's sharp at first, then numbing. Not unlike the early stages of temple wine, but without the giggles. You feel it working its way through your tongue and jaw, quieting the edge of the pain. Your cousin passes by and pauses. Chewing twigs again, he smirks. "Better than the priest's hook," you mutter back. He nods respectfully. No one forgets the priest's hook. And as you continue chewing, scraping gently between your teeth with your favorite reed, you remember that in some parts of Thebes, scribes were said to have developed their own dental codes. Tiny hieroglyphs drawn beside text to signal when a fellow scribe had a toothache. A subtle act of solidarity. The body speaks even through ink. The tools you're using may not be golden, but they're steady. They've seen years of wear. The reed is smooth where your fingers always grip it. The bronze has dulled with time, but still does its job. You imagine passing them down one day to someone who will carry them like you have, adding their own mixtures, their own daily remedies. Because in the end, the most sacred things aren't always written in stone or buried with kings. Sometimes they're passed quietly, reed to reed, hand to hand, word to word. This humble ritual of scraping and soothing and chewing isn't just about hygiene. It's memory. It's continuity. And as the shadows grow longer and your mouth feels just a little less like a battlefield, you realize you're not just healing your teeth. You're preserving a legacy. One chew, one scrape, one slow, ancient breath at a time. Evening again, and the orange light seeps into every crack like molten gold. The sky glows over the rooftops, and the air carries the scent of lentils, firewood, and river silt. You're sitting outside now, your tools beside you, your mouth calmer than it's been in days. But tonight, something else has caught your attention. An old woman across the lane is gently rubbing her teeth with something black and sticky. You squint, curious. She sees you watching and waves you over with a gnarled hand. "You've never seen this, have you?" She says, her smile wide and surprisingly very dark. You blink. Her teeth are blackened, not stained with decay, but carefully coated. It gleams faintly in the fading light, and not a single tooth appears chipped. "It's for beauty," she explains, dabbing a bit of the black substance onto a small reed stick. "And strength. You've heard rumors of this before. Tooth blackening, some called it. A cosmetic trend, or maybe a ritual where certain villagers applied natural dyes to the teeth, believing it would protect the enamel, prevent decay, and display status. The mixture varies depending on the region: burnt date pits mixed with iron oxide, tannin-rich bark boiled down into a paste. Sometimes even a hint of copper powder for that extra glint. You sit beside her as she applies a fresh layer. It started as medicine, she tells you, then became tradition. Now it's just what we do. She passes you a small jar. It smells of tree bark and charcoal, thick and resinous. You hesitate. "Won't it make me look like you belong?" she says simply. Historians still argue about whether these practices were widespread or regional. Some tomb art shows no sign of it, while others depict individuals with faintly shaded mouths. Perhaps symbolic, perhaps literal. Others believe it was a protective measure, not just against cavities, but against envy, evil spirits, and even excessive gossip. A dark smile, after all, hides much. You take a little on your finger and dab it onto a molar. The taste is bitter, almost metallic, but not unpleasant. The woman chuckles. "Now you're part of the old way," she says, tapping her own teeth proudly. "We hide the shine to keep it. There's something comforting about it. The dark coating feels like armor, a barrier between your fragile enamel and the harsh world of sandstone and salt." You feel like a stone statue, given a secret smile. A spell only the old ones still remember. Some scholars claim tooth blackening was meant to mimic the look of obsidian. Sharp, strong, beautiful. Others scoff and say it was mere superstition. But in this moment, with the sky deepening above you, and the paste settling over your back teeth like a soft cloak, it feels like something more. You thank her, pressing your palms together. She nods, her expression both kind and amused. Come back when it fades, she says. You'll miss it when it's gone. As you return home, you catch your reflection in a water jar. Your smile has changed. Not in shape, but in tone, quietly bold. The dark sheen is subtle but unmistakable. You feel older, perhaps. Wiser. As though your mouth now carries stories that stretch deeper than the Nile. And as the stars bloom overhead, and your jaw rests easy for the first time in what feels like weeks, you understand sometimes in a place of sun and glare and unrelenting exposure, it's the hidden things that keep you whole. The morning after your dark-toothed initiation arrives quietly. The sky is barely bruised with dawn as you make your way through the winding streets of Deir el-Medina, the workers' village that rests in the shadow of the Valley of the Kings. You're here to deliver a message for a scribe, but you're also here for another reason to see how people like you, the stone haulers, painters, and laborers of Egypt, took care of their teeth in the margins of royal splendor. This place is no temple. There's no gold-leafed dental scraper lying in wait, but it is full of life and laughter and the gentle hum of hard work. You stop to greet a woman grinding barley with a flat stone slab, a baby strapped to her back, and two other children playing nearby. Her smile is wide open and missing a few teeth, but she doesn't seem to mind. She pauses to wipe sweat from her brow and offers you a sip of beer, thick, sour, and flecked with grain. You take it gratefully. This is the drink of the people, low in alcohol, but rich in calories. It's a staple of daily life, and also, funnily enough, a potential enemy of oral health. The gritty mash that floats in every cup. Tiny quartz and chaff particles from the milling process, just like in bread. The very drink that sustains your body also scours your teeth like river sand in a storm. And yet these workers endure. They chew fronds from palm leaves to clean between teeth. They rinse with diluted natron when it's available. Some rub their gums with crushed fennel seeds mixed in oil, believing it strengthens the mouth and calms pain. One man tells you he burns small pieces of papyrus and mixes the ash with goose grease, his family's version of toothpaste. It works, he says with a shrug. Mostly. There's no pretense here. No gold-plated ivory picks. Just daily habits, repetitive, practical, passed from hand to hand with care and quiet dignity. You realize something in this moment. These people are closer to the core of ancient Egyptian life than the priests or palace scribes. Their dental struggles, like their lives, are straightforward and unadorned, but no less important. Historians often turn to tombs for evidence of elite hygiene, but it's places like Deir el-Medina that tell the real story. Excavations here have revealed worn molars, embedded toothpicks, and signs of jaw infections, treated with rudimentary surgery, likely done with heated metal tools and more courage than comfort. Among the ruins, archaeologists found inscriptions that hinted at prayers for relief from mouth demons, and one half-finished carving that simply reads, "The ache returns." You walk on past rows of low homes and drying linens, past jars of garlic hanging in doorways, and mint bundles left in the sun to cure. You stop at a house with a small shrine out front, a painted stone with two eyes and a stylized mouth. An offering sits below it, a chew stick wrapped in red thread. You smile. Even among the laborers, the mouth is sacred. By the time you leave Deir el-Medina, the sun is hot. Your shoulders are dusted with stone, and your teeth feel both stronger and softer somehow, as if they've absorbed the stories of the village itself. The people here may not wear gold, but they've inherited something greater: resilience, ingenuity, and a reverence for the small rituals that carry you through pain and into peace. You run your tongue across the darkened enamel of your back teeth, still coated, still whole. And as you step back onto the dusty path home, you know this. If you are ever buried beneath the sand and your skull is found centuries later, they will see the wear and wonder. This one knew the old ways. This one endured. You're back in the village by twilight, your sandals dusty, your satchel heavy with lentils, and your thoughts lingering on the narrow streets of Deir el Medina. As you sit to rest beneath your courtyard fig tree, your cousin wanders in and flops beside you. He's chewing something and grinning like a cat. Guess what he says? I met someone who works in the palace. He says the pharaoh has his own dentist. You raise an eyebrow. Of course he does. No. He insists. An actual mouth doctor. One whose job is just teeth. You shake your head, half amused. And what does a pharaoh's tooth guy do? Shave gold into paste. Maybe he says with a wink. But he says the guy has a whole room. With oils, stones, powders, even assistants. You chuckle, but you're intrigued. You've always wondered how the upper crust, the nobles, the court servants, the pharaoh himself, dealt with their teeth. You've heard of small dental chambers attached to palaces rumored to smell of cedar oil and myrrh. If the gods had mouths, surely the kings had to be treated as divine. There's no written confirmation that a royal dentist, as we know it, existed, but tomb inscriptions have referred to positions like overseer of the mouth physicians and chief of scribes of the mouth house. Were they medical experts? Priests? Alchemists? No one's quite sure. But the title alone is enough to conjure images of someone in crisp white linen, mixing crushed lapis with natron, murmuring blessings over molars. You imagine this royal dentist waking before dawn, scrubbing his hands with sand and oil, inspecting golden tools that gleam in the candlelight. Perhaps he files down a chipped canine from a vizier who gnawed too hard on roast goose. Perhaps he prepares a resin rinse for the queen infused with clove and cinnamon bark imported from the land of Punt. In a palace where every appearance was sacred, the mouth had to be perfect. Not just healthy, but aesthetically pleasing. Fresh breath for speeches. White teeth for ceremonial feasts. No room for decay. The pharaoh's smile was a symbol of order, of divine right, of the balance between the mortal and the eternal. Your cousin leans in again. He said they even color their lips with beetle shell dust to make their teeth look whiter. You squint at him. Or maybe he was messing with me, he admits. Still, it wouldn't surprise you. Cosmetics were everywhere in the palace. Kohl for the eyes, ochre for the skin, and yes, perhaps something for the teeth. Even the dead were painted carefully, their smiles shaded with care so they would look dignified in the afterlife. You lie back on the mat watching stars blink into being. Somewhere across the river, a priest is likely performing the opening of the mouth on a statue, using metal tools to awaken its divine senses. You think of the pharaoh reclining on cushions, his personal mouth physician preparing a salve crafted from honey and ash, muttering about decay as if it were treason. It's absurd, but somehow comforting. From the lowliest field laborer to the living god of Egypt, everyone feared the same twinge behind the jaw. Everyone winced. Everyone rinsed. Everyone at some point reached for a stick and hoped it would work. You sigh and press your fingers gently against your back teeth. The ache is still there, faint and familiar. But now it carries with it the ghost of a palace chamber. The imagined hush of golden bowls, and the knowledge that somewhere even atop the throne, someone else once winced, just like you. The night is deep now, and your home is quiet except for the occasional creak of reed mats adjusting to the cool air. You lie on your side, staring into the shadows on the wall, one hand resting near your jaw. You're not in pain, not really, just aware, a little pulse beneath the skin. A dull reminder that your teeth, your strange, stubborn, sand-worn teeth have carried you through another day. And it makes you think. Think about everything you've done to keep them intact. Burnt eggshells, natron rinses, goose fat mint paste bitter reeds, even the crocodile dung which you're still not ready to forgive. You've scraped, chewed, rinsed, prayed. You've rubbed tree resin on your gums and listened to tales of gods with aching jaws, all to keep your smile from becoming a graveyard. So what have you learned? That ancient Egyptian dental care was far from primitive. In fact, it was creative, resilient, sometimes desperate, sometimes elegant. You've seen toothpicks buried in tombs and reed tools passed down like sacred texts. You've tasted the past and let it settle on your tongue. It's gritty, yes, but also strangely noble. You remember walking through the market and seeing a young boy using a palm frond to floss, completely unaware he was carrying on a tradition older than half the temples in this land. You remember the old woman with her blackened teeth, proud and unbothered. You remember the scribe's reed worn from use, and the temple priest's bronze hook gleaming in the sun. It's humbling and oddly comforting. You think about the future, about the people who will find your bones, your teeth long after the last papyrus has faded. What will they say? Will they notice the scratches, the flatness, the cracks filled with ash and resin? Will they know you tried? That you fought every bite of gravel bread with all the tools passed down through dusty generations? Because you did. And maybe your toothbrush doesn't hum or light up. Maybe your toothpaste tastes like burnt barley and regret. But it works. Somehow it works. You roll over, reaching for your satchel. You pull out your chew stick, frayed, familiar, friendly, and run it gently across your molars. The motion is soft now, not urgent, just ritual, just rhythm. And as you lie there in the dark, you find yourself smiling, not broadly, not foolishly, but softly. A closed-lip Egypt-style smile. The kind that doesn't need to show teeth to speak volumes. Because you know now. You know that in the land of pharaohs and pyramids, the real monuments are not just carved from stone, they're carved into enamel, into memory, into routine. So the next time someone hands you burnt eggshell and tells you it'll help, you won't flinch. You'll nod, you'll smile, you'll chew, and you'll keep going.